Hello and welcome, believe it or not, to brew number 15. So this is my 15th playlist of my 15th brew. In the first episode, I'm going to just give a bit of an intro and probably cover the first half of the brew day. I'm guessing this is going to be a bit of a long one. So brew number 15 is a Russian Imperial Stout. But not any Russian Imperial Stout. I was really wanting a couple of things out of the next recipe. The first thing I wanted was a bit more complexity in the ingredients, and that is certainly true with 5 different grains and 4 different hops involved. I've got some more complexity, so I am really looking forward to that. Second, I was really interested in using a well-developed recipe, and with that in mind I actually found the DIY dog, the BrewDog recipe for old world Russian Imperial Stout, which sounded absolutely great, but there are a few challenges with that. So although I really wanted to follow a recipe precisely, and that was something that I was really interested in doing, in practice I had to make substitutions. And some of those substitutions were simply because I couldn't get hold of the specific hops, and I'll talk through what the substitutions are in a second. But second, I also had to scale down the volume because I wanted to do it as a 1 gallon or 5 litre to be precise. And in scaling it down to that, I had a bit of a challenge. And that challenge was the fact that I had a high volume of grain. And I do know in the crock pots that I've got and that I use on the stove, you know, sort of 1.3 kilograms is about the sort of comfortable amount. I did do more than that on previous brews, and it was quite messy, but I just about got away with it. So I had to make another adjustment to the recipe, which was to also include a little bit of DME to reduce the grain content, so to balance that out. So you know, despite the fact I really wanted to follow a recipe, in the end I'm not doing that at all. I've actually had to make quite a few adjustments, so a more precise recipe will be my next one. However, a stout is something I've been thinking about for a while, and I had been looking at the Irish stout, and I think I'm going to come back and do that in a future brew. But for this one, it really did give me a really complex recipe to use, a complex grain bill, much more sort of to do with the hops. So I am looking forward to all of that. So the other thing that was interesting about the DIY dog recipe was the yeast. And actually, you know, when you put the recipe into Brewfather or Brewsmith or one of the sort of various tools that you can use to actually sort of do the calculations for you, what I found was that the yeast substitute that I was using didn't have the attenuation that clearly the yeast used in DIY dog did, because this comes out at 9.5%. And no matter what I did with the recipe, I could not make that work out. So in actual fact, you know, although the OG on this was 1075, in my adjusted recipe, I am actually going for a slightly higher OG to still give me the 9.5% ABV expected from the recipe. There was also a nice little tip included, which was about the chocolate malt, and the tip sort of says here: add the chocolate malt after the mash is complete at the start of sparging. This will extract flavour and colour, but will prevent the extraction of harsh tannins into the wort. So that's what I'm going to do when I sort of complete the mash. I'm going to then add the very small amount actually of chocolate malt into the sparging process. So some of my substitutions in the original was Hercules, for which I'm substituting a Chinook, and there was Galena in the original, for which I'm substituting Columbus. Magnum was the main one in the recipe, and I was able to get hold of that, so that is good. And then finally, Cascade was the 4th hop, and I am using a substitute of Centennial for that one. The mash temperature is going to be 64 degrees C or 147 degrees Fahrenheit, and unusually the mash is also going to be 90 minutes. So this is a 90-minute mash according to the recipe. So with all of those things in mind, I am going to get started. Thank you for watching, and keep tuned. We have 3.5 litres of distilled water. The main malt is a extra pale Maris Otter malt. We have 1 kilogram of that, that's all going to go in. We have 157 grams of dark crystal. We have 70 grams of Carafa 300 Special B malt. We also have 70 grams of Carafa Special Type 3 malt. And finally, we do have our very small amount, 15 grams of chocolate malt that's going to go in after the mash. Also, to help us out, I've got some dry malt extract, which we're going to add at various stages just to sort of bulk up the sugars in there and sort of let me reduce the sort of grain bill a little bit. Sanitization has all been done. If not, I've got some sanitizer left here for anything other I need. Step 1. Bring our 3.5 litres of distilled water up to 64 degrees centigrade. These are our water chemicals for the mash and for the sparge. And the water chemicals will, or should, bring us to a type of brew that is a stout. So the water profile that we're creating with a very tiny amount of water chemicals given our volume is a stout type water. There will also be 3.8 litres of sparge water, also distilled water, and we'll also add water chemicals at the appropriate time. We have reached 64 degrees just, so I'm going to add the water chemicals. All the water chemicals I've mixed together just to make it easier to pop them in. We're still at 64 degrees. So step 3, we can add all of the grains except the chocolate. So I'm also doing it slightly differently this time because I always cycle the wort. I'm not going to put it in the bag straight away. We'll just see how that goes and analyse it at the end. So this is our 1 kilogram of extra pale Maris Otter. Don't want any clumping, so I'll give that a mix. While I'm giving that a mix, I'm going to also add the dark crystal. Ooh, that's a nice smell. This one also. This one is the Cara 300 Special B. And Carafa Type 3, last but not least. Right, tempers drop just a tiny amount, so you just keep that going. So, step 4 is to maintain the temperature at 64 degrees, and I keep on stirring to make sure we get the most out of these grains. While the mash is going, it seems like a good time to talk a little bit about this yeast. So this is the Safe Ale US 05. First time I've used this yeast, and what was interesting particularly about this one was the attenuation, that actually it produced a higher alcohol percentage than some of the other yeasts that I've been using more recently. So we'll see how this goes in terms of achieving as close to that 9.5% ABV as we possibly can on this ale. We are at 70 minutes. The smell is absolutely wonderful. Step 7, 10 minutes before the end of the mash, we bring sparge water up to 78 degrees. Our sparge water is just closing in on 78 degrees, so we can add the water chemicals. Distilled water to clean it. 8.04 is where it ended. I wonder if the chemicals didn't have time to dissolve.